to lose my microphone.
Me too. I just thought mine.
Well, it's so great to be back on stage with my good friend, Brian Messier. So Brian, thank you so much for joining Res 2025. Before we really get into the details of your role and sort of some of your thoughts, let's give people some background about our relationship. So why don't you introduce yourself and sort of let's talk about us hanging out.
Yeah. I think, you and I, Chris, met over almost 20 years ago when we were lowly staffers in our respective orgs, and now we're heading up two very large organizations in the BIA and, of course, the National Center. But if it's all right with everybody here that may not know me, I'd like to just tell you a little bit about me and my story. So my name is Brian Mercier. I'm Clackamas and Kalapuya descent, enrolled with the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde, which is in Western Oregon, where I was born and raised. Went to high school in Salem, went to the University of Oregon, go Ducks. And then after I graduated from the University of Oregon, I decided to I tried to become a professional soccer player in Europe. Didn't quite make it. I was more of a semi-pro, kind of in the minor leagues of soccer for 7 years, from 22 to 29. And that was an amazing experience for me to live abroad because I was a very shy kid growing up, and I would never have been able to do this job without having lived abroad. It also prepares me well as the director because I had to learn to adapt to different cultures, different languages, and in Indian country we have many of those. When I came back from Europe as a 29-year-old intern with the Udall Foundation on the Hill with Senator Gordon Smith, he was the senator from Oregon. I stayed on with Senator Smith for another year as a Hatfield Fellow. Those of you that don't know about the Hatfield program, the Grand Ronde Tribe, we actually sponsor for a year a young Native professional to go work in the delegation for a year. And so I stayed on after the Udall Foundation as the Hatfield Fellow with Gordon Smith. 2005, I decided to leave politics and become a public servant and became a Fed with the Forest Service for a couple years. And then I went to the CDFI fund at the Department of Treasury where I met Chris. Chris was working for a CDFI in North Carolina. In 2009, my grandmother, who's since passed, was getting ill. I wanted to spend a couple years with her, so I resigned and I recruited Chris to come join the CDFI fund.
And that is a true story. Brian actually recruited me to join the CDFI fund.
Yeah, and he did a wonderful job there and went on to be SBA appointee for Obama, and now he's here.
Yeah.
But anyway, so after I went back to Oregon in 2009, I worked for the Bonneville Power Administration, where I ran their Fish and Wildlife program, which is the largest environmental mitigation program in the country. Until about almost 7 years ago now, I became the regional director in the Northwest region. My predecessor, Mr. Stanley Speaks, I'm curious, who here knew Stanley Speaks? Just a hand in the air, because Stan is a legend in the BIA. 59-year career. He retired at 84. He was 40 years the regional director in the Northwest. So I like to joke and say I was the first new RD in the Northwest in 2 generations, really, right? It had been a while.
That's great.
And about 6 months ago, I got appointed the director of the BIA in the national office. Yeah. And it's been quite a joy. I love the BIA. I love Interior. It's been to 4 different federal agencies. It's unique in our history, or just over 200 years now that the BIA has been in existence, and we've evolved a lot over those 200 years, and we will continue to do so.
Well, thank you for that great back. Let's give Brian a hand. I
appreciate it.
I mean, that's you've had quite a journey, and it's just so awesome to see how you pushed your boundaries and made choices, and have been such a supporter for our communities for so many years. I'm going to ask you some real basic questions because I don't recall that we've had a director of BIA on stage, at least the past 8 years. I don't remember one being here, but definitely we haven't had one on main stage. So I'm really excited that you were able to come and accept the invitation. Tell me a little bit about how the Bureau of Indian Affairs fits in with tribal programs at the Department of Interior, because it's a little, there's plenty of programs going on. Give us a little bit of of what the BIA does, and if you could provide us just a little bit of background on the difference between the head of BIA and the Assistant Secretary for Indian Affairs, which you are acting right now as Assistant Secretary of Indian Affairs. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and a lot of folks are surprised to kind of learn the history and the evolution of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. So as I mentioned, the BIA was created in 1824 in the Department of War, if you didn't know that. So we predate the Department of Interior by 25 years. It wasn't until 1849 that the Department of Interior was created. And so when Interior was created, the Bureau of Indian Affairs was brought over and housed in Interior. And you know, I think it's fair to say over 200 years, federal Indian policy has not always worked for Indian country and for tribes. There's been many failed policies and attempts to improve the lives of Indian people. Fortunately, in the last 50 years, we've been in an era that seems to be working, self-determination. So since the 1970s, when ISDEA, the Indian Self-Determination Education Enhancement Act, passed 638, as we all know it, shorthand, we've seen a massive evolution of the BIA from direct services to largely a technical service provider and funder of tribes. Back in the 70s, the BIA had over 16,000 employees across the country. Today, we have less than 7,000. Those 9,000 employees didn't disappear. They're now tribal employees. They're now people that work at the tribes. The funding that once funded those feds are now funding tribal employees in your communities. And that's continuing, right? And with the new administration, that's going to continue even faster, I think. But we've been on this journey of 50 years of self-determination, where having a centralized bureaucracy provide the services may not work in the communities, and it may be better served by you may serve your communities better yourselves through our 638 contracting and compacting. So that's the journey we are on. I tell my folks in the BIA all the time, our job is to work ourselves out of a job, building capacity of tribes so that many of the services are delivered by the tribes themselves. Now, I'm a firm believer there always needs to be a BIA because we're the chief advocate within the federal family to ensure that the trust responsibility remains steadfast. But we don't need to have 7,000 employees. We can do that with maybe a few thousand. And I think we'll continue to work ourselves out of a job as we move forward. But we need to do it smartly, right? We need to do it in a way that allows for the tribal communities to succeed. And that's my job as the senior most career person at the BIA. Who happens to be, we can't say acting, the attorneys say I can't say I'm acting assistant secretary, I'm exercising authority of the assistant secretary.
My apologies.
Thank you.
Exercising the authority. Right. That's too many words for me.
I know. So we all do say shorthand acting, but, and so to your initial question, so the BIA and the BIA director is a career. The assistant secretary is a political appointee, and there's a number of deputy assistant secretaries as well that are political. So my boss changes every 4 years. In this position. And it's very important that for me to be successful, one, I'm very apolitical, bipartisan, and focus on the mission, which is serving Indian people and tribes. And so I am there to advocate and to ensure that we continue that mission. And it's, you know, anytime there's a transition from one part to the next, there's always, it's a big shift, it's a big change, and many of us are witnessing that right now. But I will say that the team that is there, and they're still pretty early, so we don't have a full team, have been very professional, responsive, and respectful. And they have been heeding my advice most of the time. And so I wanted to reassure everybody there that from my perspective, and again, as an apolitical senior career person, it's not going bad. It's going pretty well with the new team there. They've been receptive. But it's pretty early. We only have 2 politicals. And I think, you know, a lot of folks read in the press these bigger initiatives that sometimes catch up in Indian country, and they get a little nervous. But from my perspective, it's actually going pretty well.
You know, we've all, in our communities, we've had relationships with BIA, if it's over land or things. But sometimes you didn't know that sort of connection and how it all fits in. But also there's lots of misconceptions about your office. So what are some misconceptions about maybe BIA or working with BIA that you can maybe clear up for us?
Yeah. Well, I mean, everybody that's grown up in Indian country has heard the joke about BIA boss Indians around, right? And there was probably some truth to that back in the day. It's probably not just a joke. There was probably some truth to it. One of the things that I want to do as a new director is change that business culture, right? There is a little bit of this paternalism that we need to shed from the BIA. Again, we need to bring back a sense of customer service. You all are the clients. We work for you. We would not have our jobs but for the tribes and tribal communities in this country. And I want to ingrain that culture into the staff, because we often forget that because we have these authorities, we exercise these duties over lands or whatever it may be, that we're in control. It's actually the opposite, right? We all work for you. And so that is going to be my primary mission for however long I'm in the director position, is to try to change that business culture so that we have a sense, our staff take pride in the mission of working for their own people, but also remembering that we work for you all. You all are the clients. And so I'll be measuring my performance with you all based on that customer experience. When I was a Northwest Regional Director, I used to always joke with all the tribes, and there's probably a lot of them here today, that each of them had a seat on my board of directors. And while I have political leadership, that's my boss, I actually measure my performance with my board of directors. So I have 574 directors now that I'm looking to for guidance of how I'm doing in my performance. And that customer experience is going to be one of those things that I hope to improve on with you all.
I want to see an applause for that. Thank you. That is, and Brian and I have known each other for 20 years, but that is such a welcome attitude for federal service, and I really appreciate that. I mean, that's a really powerful and impacting statement, and I really am happy to hear that. So I know you've just been on board about 6 months.
Yep.
What are some of the highlights that you would like to highlight about the office, about maybe some of your leadership? Tell us a little bit more about what you're going to do.
Yeah. Well, and of course, 6 months was back in September. We had an election and a transition, so it's been pretty intense for me, to be honest. It's been a lot.
Probably a lot of fires.
Yeah. There's a lot of things going on, and every day I'm learning to be very nimble, and the future is uncertain. And I think that's not new to us in Indian country, right? We've been resilient for hundreds of years. I failed to mention in my introduction that my mother was actually an Irish immigrant. She immigrated from Ireland. And I like to joke with people that I'm a first-generation immigrant. It's been here 14,000 years, and watch people try to figure that out. But if you know the history of Ireland, they've been struggling for centuries as well for self-determination. So very similar to what we have here in Indian country, what the Irish have gone through. And so there's changes and times that will always be tough. And we will always need to just be resilient and be flexible and see the opportunity that is presented to us. And there is a lot of opportunity right now in the next 4 years. Energy development, economic development, law enforcement, those are priorities I've heard from Secretary Burgum's mouth. And he wants to really have us focus on that. So I'm encouraging everybody I speak with to jump at these opportunities, to work with this administration for those things. Deregulation, the bossing in and around joke I was making earlier. The 25 CFR is like this thick, right? I mean, for folks, technically we're supposed to have Indian traders licenses when business operates on reservations. That's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Those are the things that we can start to reduce and remove and improve on over the next 4 years, and I hope we jump at the opportunity.
And also, as you start, what are some of your tactics on how you're going to achieve some of that? Because I know, again, we all have some experience. We've all been we're waiting on leases, and we're waiting on sometimes mainly a lot of land that I've dealt with the BIA. And sometimes I just don't know always what the problem is. So is it often a backup, or is it just...
so sometimes it's statutory, right? Yeah. So sometimes we need to work with Congress to change the law because it's required by statute that a federal agent or somebody has to do X, Y, or Z. But much of it is regulatory. So it's just us over years, 200 years, developing regulations that have created this red tape. And so this administration has made it very clear through executive orders and secretarial orders that we are to reduce that unnecessary regulation. So I open invitation to anybody here. If you find a regulation that you think is not statutory and is causing that burden on your community or business or whatever, please raise your hand and share it with us, because we will take a serious look at trying to eliminate it and streamline it and make it easier. And a lot of this, because of the long history, some of these regs are hundreds of years old, and we just haven't gotten around to updating them, and now we have an opportunity to do that.
Well, we really appreciate your leadership on that effort, because that's very welcoming, I think, for our communities to hear, because I know we have so many times where we're sort of waiting without really knowing why. So I really appreciate that.
And that's also, Chris, just back to that customer experience. We do have inherently federal functions that we have staff that need to complete that. And we have capacity issues. We have a lot of vacancies and needs. But we also still have a culture that often would be, that can wait. And I want to change that a little bit.
You know, the customer service experience is so key. And you know, we really appreciate your willingness for us to provide feedback. At the National Center, that's really important to us, because to have that, you know, oftentimes, you know, we're not consulted, or we don't always have a seat at the table. So it's really, really great to hear you say that. If people want to reach out to your office, maybe, you know, how would they do that? Do they need to start regionally, or do they go to Washington? How do people reach out?
Yeah, anytime you're in Washington, please swing by our main interior building and come for a visit. But yeah, we do try to push the decisions down lowest in the organization, because it just adds more layers of bureaucracy to come all the way to the top. But sometimes you need to just shake some things loose. So I'm always welcoming that. So you can get my email and my phone number off of our website. But I'm happy to share it as well with folks. But yeah, please do visit us in Washington, D.C. Yeah, but please start with your agency, your region. If it's something that's a local issue, national issues is what we normally deal with in D.C.
Thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you so much for your federal service. I know it's not always easy to be the advocate. I mean, one of the things Brian shared with me back in 2009 to help really start my career was, a lot of times I'm going to be the only Native voice in the room. And that's something I've always kept, and you have always been that strong voice, and I really appreciate that. So thank you so much for your leadership. Thank you. Before we wrap up, I know 15 minutes goes like lightning. Anything else that you might want to add to the audience before we wrap up?
Yeah, I want to say thank you to you all, because, you know, we've felt a lot of support in Indian country with all the changes that have impacted our federal workforce, and so thank you for that. You know, we have been really supported. We've really felt the support that you all have provided for us, and I just wanted to express my gratitude to all the tribal leaders in the room for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Director. We really appreciate it. To the audience, thank you so much for letting us spend some time with you at this Fireside Chat. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.